Hi everyone, it's Gordon here, man knitted in Scotland. I only expected ever to make one video and put it up, but so many people have been interested in so many aspects of both what I talked about and what I did on the last video, and also what I did on the show and things that have arisen from that I just thought I would come back and expand a little bit on a few bits of it, and also answer a few things. People have sent me questions or asked things in the comments under the last video, or indeed on general posts from Game of Wool and from various groups. Questions have arisen, so I thought I would come on and do those. I would have done it sooner. I've had a busy couple of days. Wednesday and yesterday I was in playing at the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra. We were doing the original film score for the 1935 film Bride of Frankenstein. It's fascinating, glorious score. It's fascinating. There must be software nowadays. Well, I know there is, but it must have been what they used. They've managed to take all the music out of the film, but leave the dialogue intact. And then they showed the film on an enormous screen in the city halls in Glasgow with the original dialogue, but we, the orchestra, provided the original music for the opening titles and all the underscores. It was really quite brilliant. So I've had that. That's why I haven't made this video sooner. And I'm trying to get it done before I go away. We're travelling tomorrow. I'm playing on Sunday at the Victoria Hall Saltaire, which is on the outskirts of Bradford in Yorkshire. And then I'll be back on the organ stool Monday and Tuesday at my beloved Wurlitzer organ of the Tower Ballroom, Blackpool. Also, while I was doing the BBC thing on Wednesday, my wife came to Glasgow with me. She went and had a prowl around. And one of the things we've collected all the time that we've been travelling the world on cruise ships, and for other reasons, but mainly on cruise ships. The first few years you do it, you bring back all the tourist tat, all the things, then you have no idea what to do with them. So we made a decision about 7 or 8 years ago that we would stop buying souvenirs from different countries other than Christmas tree decorations. We've got tree decorations from all over the world. She found a little shop in Glasgow and brought me a Christmas tree decoration that's a ball of wool. I thought it was very cute, so that'll be going on the tree this year for the first time, my little ball of wool. You'll also hear my voice is pretty lacking in resonance, a bit croaky, a bit rough. I've come down with a cold. One of the things that arose from the last video was people seemed to be interested that I said I knitted in the round on 3 needles. People are used to knitting in the round on 4 needles if you're knitting socks, for example. It's exactly the same principle, except you use 3 instead of 4. There's no difference, really. So I'll show you that now. Also, one of the things that I talked about extensively during the filming of Game of Wool was my knitting belt. All the other contestants were very interested in my knitting belt, which in one shot you saw me wearing, but editing time, I mean, goodness gracious, I just don't know how they even got it down to the time they did. Knitting belt's a very, very useful thing. It increases your speed, it reduces strain because you're not holding the weight of your knitting. But this is my knitting belt, which I bought from Shetland, and it's made of leather, and it's stuffed with horsehair, and it has holes in it. And when you knit, as I do, with the long double-pointed needle, that's a 40-centimetre double-pointed needle. I only ever buy Addi, A-D-D-I, Addi double-pointed needles because they make them in 40 centimetres, which that is. I get mine from either Jimison and Smith in Lerwick or Jimisons of Shetland. They supply them and they'll post out, and that's what, even if I'm not knitting in the round, even if I'm knitting flat, I use the double-pointed needles because they will go into my knitting belt. And what I do, the most customary thing, I wear mine quite high. Some of you might be thinking, others wear them literally around their waist. I don't have much of a waist anymore. I wear mine quite high, round about my ribs here. But you put your right hand needle into the knitting belt, and then you have no responsibility for holding it up. And your right hand's only job really then, apart from maybe guiding it a little bit to get it into stitch, is throwing your wool over. I knit right, I knit what they call English style. I put the wool over with my right hand. So your left hand that has the stitches on it is doing a little more movement, but your right hand is free just for putting the wool over and maybe pulling the stitches down a little. Part of the reason I like these needles better than a circular wire, now I do use a circular wire, and there were a couple of shots I did try the circular wire when I wasn't getting anywhere with my wooden needles. Part of the thing with these over a circular wire is that I can knit infinitely more stitches before I have to spread pull the stitches down the needle. I can knit 20, 30, 40 stitches before I need to stop and move everything down the needle. That's a great bonus. They're also very nice and slippery. I will use a circular wire sometimes. For example, if I'm going on a train, going on a plane, it's very hard to get knitting onto a plane nowadays, the needles anyway. Or if I'm going somewhere where I know I'm going to be sitting and I can't really spread out and have my arm going like mad, well, of course, a circular wire is much more compact. I would use that then. But even for flat knitting, I'll use these double-pointed needles because it means I can use my knitting belt. Now, on the program, of course, we were using very wide gauge needles. The thinnest needle I used in the program was a 10 mil. For the sofa challenge, I was using a 20 millimeter needle and 2 strands of super chunky at once to get the bulk that we needed. It also I was mainly knitted the sand, it ended up being about, I think, 4.5 feet by 5 feet. That was the panel I knitted. It didn't look much on the sofa, but it was the whole seat of the sofa, which was quite deep, and down the front. So that was about 4.5 feet by almost 5 foot wide. So in order to get the sand effect, I used 2 different shades of sort of yellowy sandy gold, a paler one and a darker one, and it gave it a sort of mottled effect, gave it, that sort of salt and pepper. I couldn't fit them. I mean, if I tried to force a 10 millimeter DPN, the ones I made, into the holes in my knitting belt, I would ruin it. But what I did do was, what you can do, even if you don't have double pointed needles or you're using very, very thick ones, is I fastened it a bit tighter so it was tight against me, and I wedged the end of my needle behind it, and it still gave me that support. Not perhaps as good as if I had put it into the openings in it, but I got it. Those big 20s that we used for the sofa, they had a stopper in the end. I got that well wedged down between my knitting belt and my body, and it still helped me. And that's where I really feel I need this, even on Fair Isle projects. If there are rows that have got minimal colour work in them, or are just, you sometimes have a couple of rows of solid colour between bands, that's when I can't get any speed up at all with a circular wire. Actually, my latest project is this hat. Now, this hat, the design of this is called Acht, and it's by Hazel Tyndall. And if you follow me for any length of time, I won't be able to talk about my Fair Isle knitting without referring quite a lot and talking quite a lot about Hazel Tyndall. I have a few stories that just highlight her brilliance and her kindness to me that I'll tell you another time. There isn't time. This would end up being the longest video. But she designed this hat, Acht, and I think I've knitted well over 100 of these. That is the Fair Isle hat pattern that I've knitted more than any other. It's a very attractive design, and that's what I've done over the last, well, I could normally knit one of these in a day if I sat at it all day. I could probably do that in 12 hours. And at one point during lockdown, when all musical performance work had ceased, that's how I was supporting my wife and me. She became an Avon lady, and I was knitting these for sale. And I was turning out one a day, but that was me getting up in the morning, starting after breakfast, and probably was finishing it off and snipping my ends at midnight. But that, stopping for meals, of course, and for rest. But I've knitted over 100 of these. So that's the latest thing I've done. I'm starting doing these ready for Christmas gifts for people. That was knitted on the double pointed needles. And I'll let you see that I haven't finished my ends off yet. But there is the inside. Ignore all these loose ends. There is the inside. And it's a proper Fair Isle pattern because there aren't any long floats. That's one of the things about Fair Isles. We know how to deal with long floats, but the really traditional patterns didn't include too many of them. And as you can see from that, it almost is a pattern in itself on the wrong side. That's what I've been doing. That's done in, it'll either be Jimison and Smith or more likely to be Jimison's of Shetland jumper weight. They call it 2-ply. It's about the same weight as, you know, what we would know as 4-ply. If you are going to knit Fair Isle, can I suggest, it's only a suggestion, if you're going to knit Fair Isle and you're going to knit proper Shetland patterns, it would be really good if you bought your wool from Shetland, from a Shetland supplier. These two companies I've mentioned, Jamieson and Smith and Jamison's of Shetland, are great. Jamison's of Shetland especially have, I don't think you could imagine any colour that they don't supply, and they've all got such imaginative names. There are just pages and pages and pages of colour. They do the subtlest difference between sort of, you know, lilac and soft lilac and sky blue and forget-me-not blue. That they're so close but different, very, very different. So I think just it would be lovely if you did want to knit Fair Isle that you perhaps got real Shetland wool and supported the producers. There are also some wonderful cottage industries, independent producers, Elizabeth Johnson being one, a great knitter, a great authority on knitting, but she spins her own wool for sale. The technique evolved from that wool. It behaves slightly differently from a lot of wools. It feels different, but once you've knitted your pattern and once you block that, it all holds. There's no movement that you would get with wools with silk in them, for example. They become very, very set. And people talk about sticky wool. Wool isn't sticky. It doesn't feel sticky to your touch, but it's got a grip. It grips with itself almost like Velcro, to the point that when I'm finishing this hat, I won't weave in those ends. I weave in as I go on the band so that if people want to turn the band up at the bottom, they can. But the rest of it, I'll tighten the knots. I'm a knotter. I know lots of people don't like knots in knitting, but I am a knotter. I will tighten the knots and I will cut those ends to about 1/4 of an inch. And that's all I'll do. Then once I wash it and I put it on something to block it, I have a milliner's block, or sometimes I've seen me doing it on a balloon or on a, if you've got a sort of plastic food storer that's about the right size, you do it in that. They get sort of squashed in, and once they dry, they don't even stick out. So that's how I do that. It's a great wool. It's what Shetland knitting in Fair Isle really was based on, and it will behave in the right way for Fair Isle. Anyway, going back to this 3-needle thing here, I don't look too closely at this, please, because I've literally just thrown it onto the needles for sake of something to show you. But there are my 3 needles, and what you do is you cast on 1 needle. If you want, you can knit the first row in flat if you want. But then you put half of your needle, half your stitches onto a second needle, and then when you start knitting, you just go round and round, and once you get on the go, when you get to the end of a row or a needle, you're left with your stitches on 2 needles very close together. I can just about get my pinky down through between those, but they're very close together. And then all you do when it comes time to the actual working of it is, and I'll probably stop talking when I'm doing this so that I can speed up the video a little bit to get to the end of the row, and you'll see what's going on. But you just start the same as you do on 3 or 4 needles if you're knitting socks. Just go like so, get a good start, and off we go. And I knit all the way along this first needle. Now I'm pausing here because you'll see that as we get to about halfway along, it has opened out into something like a triangle. There's a lot more space. I can get my fingers in there to work, which is, after about the first 5 or 6 stitches, I can get my fingers between it. And the needle that's on the bottom there, I'm completely ignoring that. It's underneath, it's hanging down. I'm not involving that in the process at all. It's just dangling there. And here we are at the end of the row. One of the needles that had stitches on it has become my free needle, and we're back to those on there. Now, one little thing. This isn't colour work, it isn't Fair Isle. I've just done this in one colour so that I may show you how it works. However, because you've got 2 together and there's a bit of a gap, if you're knitting plain knitwise knitting in a single colour, it's very hard not to get ladders at the joins of the stitches. If you're knitting Fair Isle, there's a little bit more reinforcement with the other colour running behind. You can find a way not to get ladders. So if you were doing that in Fair Isle, you would always know that this was the end of your row. However, just to be sure, I've got my own way of doing it, which I actually got online from Elizabeth Johnson, whom I mentioned a few moments ago. I mark the start and end of my row with a stitch marker. It can be a little bit of yarn, and I don't always keep it there. And what I do when I want to start again, when I'm about to start knitting from a new needle, instead of having to turn that corner, I put the last 4 stitches that I knitted onto my new needle at one end, and then I slide them down to the other, and I start from there. And then I've no corner to turn. I'm already in the position I would be if I were 4 stitches into the row. And I'll do that every time. So the start and end of my row where my marker is will move along the needle with all those groups of 4 I move. But you're doing it from both needles, so your stitch count in each needle is never far away. It'll be 4 out every other row, and it'll be right the next row because you're moving the 4 stitches you put on at one end, you're taking back off the other. So there, I'm starting again this new row. I'm not turning a corner, I'm not starting a new needle, I'm actually 4 stitches in just because I moved the latest 4 stitches onto my working needle, and off we go again. And we knit along, and I'll stop talking again, we can go faster. I've had a few questions and things people might like to know. So while I'm knitting along here, I can perhaps tell you about those. Someone mentioned that my time was used up quite a lot, you know, in my tank top. I've explained all about the tank top. Why did I include a pocket if it was going to be under pressure of time? The reason I included the pocket was because part of the brief, which we got in advance, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Okay, I'm at the end of that row. My reason for including the pocket was we got the brief out in advance. People were asking, they were surprised that we knew in advance. All these programs, even the Bake Off, you'll hear Paul Hollywood saying to them, have you practiced this at home? You know, your own one, the one that comes from you personally, you get warning about, and you get the chance to test knit it. I don't think that'll come as a surprise to anybody that we didn't have to actually think up our design and work out how to shape a tank top in 12 hours. And the part of the brief was a reimagining of Fair Isle. Not a non-traditional Fair Isle, something that says something about you, but brings Fair Isle a little up to date. Now, I felt the colours that I chose sort of brought it up to date because they were quite zingy. And someone asked me why I chose those colours. It was for no other reason than that we were prescribed the wool to use, and I'll come to that in a moment. And I wanted the three darkest colours of similar value that I could get in the range for my background, and the 3 or 4 brightest colours for my pattern yarn. So that my choice of colours didn't really go beyond that. The 3 darkest and the 3 brightest, so that I got maximum contrast. Contrast is very effective in stranded colour work. So that's why I chose my colours. And also to bring it, I thought the inclusion, the pocket was specifically for a mobile phone, for a smartphone. It was the dimensions, it was long. It wasn't all that wide, it was long. And it was just to be enough that you could slip a smartphone in. And I thought that that gave a nod to modernity. It wasn't just a pocket, it was specifically a smartphone pocket. So that's why I put the pocket in. And obviously anything you add to knitting takes time. It didn't take a great deal of time. The pocket lining in wool of that gauge and in needles of that gauge was probably 8 or 10 stitches wide, 8 probably, and possibly, I don't know, 14 rows, if that. So I had that knitted probably in 10 minutes. And then actually making the opening doesn't, I'll do another video sometime showing you that pocket. It isn't my idea. It's actually Hazel Tyndall's method for putting in a pocket. May well be a very traditional one. But you put however many stitches for the width of your pocket onto a holder, carry on, and in the next round, where you put your stitches on the holder, you slip the lining that you have knitted already onto the needles, carry on, and then on the next round, you just treat the lining as part of the whole. So you just knit over those stitches and they become incorporated. And then all there is to do at the end, which would probably take 15 minutes, is you stitch the lining in place, whip stitch it to the back, catch it so that it doesn't show through the front, which wouldn't have taken all that terribly long. And then take your stitches off the holder, put them onto needles and knit 2 rows in a contrasting colour if you like. That is a placket for your pocket, and a couple of stitches at either end to put it in place. So the pocket probably added, had I finished it, would have added about 20 minutes maximum. But it helped me fulfill part of the brief because I wasn't 100% happy that it would look modern enough. I was using it was my own design of traditional Fair Isle patterning, the band, the chest band. It was my own design, but it was very much in the traditional mould, what we call OXO, X's and O's, of a sort. So I was frightened that perhaps I would be marked down for it being too traditional, and I thought that the smartphone pocket was made it a little bit more modern. Back to the steeks that we talked about. This jumper I've never finished. I went on a diet, a big person. I went on a brutal meal replacement diet in 2020 or 21, and I lost 4.5 stone. And I celebrated this by knitting this jumper, again designed by Hazel Tyndall. I told you her name would come up a lot when talking about my Fair Isle knitting. It is the most beautiful design. It really is stunning. Not my knitting of it, but it is. I haven't finished it yet because I know I can't put it on. So my ambition is to get it on again. I have one sleeve and a bit of a sleeve. And I just wanted to show you that this pattern has steeked armholes knitted in the round. Someone also said that although I had explained quite extensively what steeking is and how it was done, what is it in a nutshell? What steeking allows is that you can knit anything tubular, which is ideal for colour work because you can knit knitwise, round and round. You never need to do a purl row unless you're adding a rib or something of that sort. It allows you to knit a tube and then cut it open to be something flat. or cut armholes, neck holes. I wouldn't dare do it, but I mean, I could turn that almost, I probably don't have enough stitches in the front for it to meet. I could turn that into a cardigan by having included a steek in the front, then cutting them and adding bands. That's how many people do Fair Isle cardigans. But this is my jumper. The design's called Hinnerley, and that was one of the suggested. Of course, I'm inside out now, and again, you can see my floats. You can see the inside. There are a lot of unfinished ends, but you can see proper Fair Isle without too many long floats. It's all, you could almost wear it inside out, and it would be a slight variation on the pattern. But the arms were steeked, and here we are here. You can see where the steeks were cut. I haven't stitched them down because it was for myself. I never would have done. I would just have left them like that. But there is where the steeks were cut. And the arms are added on again as tubes in the round. You pick up all the stitches and you knit your sleeve in the round. This all developed, I'm quite sure, for speed. That you know the feeling of knitting a garment and getting all the parts knitted and all your ends woven in, and then it's a whole other operation to sew everything together. With these methods, when you got to the end, you were really only left with the finishing of ends, because when you knitted the last stitch of the garment, you had a complete garment. Everything was picked up and added on. So that you cut the steeks, you add the sleeves. I also knitted this jumper for myself recently. As I said, I supported us through lockdown by knitting Fair Isle hats, and I had people wanted all different colour schemes. I'd built up a huge stash of half-used balls of wool and even new ones that I had bought that I had never needed. So I decided to knit this. It's a bit of a loud one. Knit this jumper for myself with all my leftover wool. I didn't even use half of what I had left over, but this is my this is what I call my my leftover sweater. Again, it was knitted in the round, steeked sleeves, steeked armholes. I'll only turn one inside out because it doesn't look any different to one I've just shown you. In fact, I think my steeks are even neater in this because I knitted fewer spare stitches, I think. Now, one of the upsides of knitting this jumper in the round was because there's no pattern to it, and I didn't use a pattern. I'll show you that in a minute. I knitted it out of my head, and I made a little error of judgment with it. One of the great things about knitting in the round, if you're just using up wool, was because the whole body was knitted in a tube like one big sock, the stripes match back and front. You know, I would have had to have seamed up the sides, and I would either have had to make sure I had enough wool left to make the back match the front. But in this case, I didn't have to, because all the way around, you're going round and round, so your yarn just travels all the way. So the coloured stripes in that go round and round my body. And the error of judgment I made, I didn't use a pattern. I knitted, I just made it up. I just used a general jumper shape with straight added on sleeves. I was so frightened of the top of the arms here being tight and looking silly, and I went too far the other way, and the jumper has got the biggest bingo wings you've ever seen in your life. If I'm wearing it, if I move my arm too fast, the doors slam. I mean, it creates a draft when I move my arm. Enormous bingo wings. I won't put it on. So very big 80s sleeves. It looks fine when I wear it. I get away with it. But if I ever did one again, I'd be careful not to make the tops of the sleeves quite, not such long rows, not quite so many, not quite so many stitches for the tops of the arms. It really was a bit over the top. I could have probably saved a bit of yarn there and knitted another one, but it really is large. What else have people asked me? Oh, game of wool. Quite a lot of people were writing online. Was it all wool? Was everything there? Now, I don't know, because I was only in one episode. I should hope so, but I honestly don't know. What I can tell you is we were told we had to take all the labels away before the cameras were rolling. so that they could keep control of product placement and things. But it's no secret now that the tank tops were knitted in a Rowan big wool, super chunky, very, very thick. I've got a little of it here. In fact, I can let you see how thick it is, even just, I mean, it's almost like washing line, but it feels lovely. Now, all the tank tops were knitted in that, and that is 100% pure merino. Some of the patterns, 3 of the patterns from the show have been released now as kits for sale, so it's no secret. I'm not giving anything away to tell you that that was Rowan big wool, 100% merino, and all the wools that that I used in the sofa challenge, merino. So that, you know, I don't know, I couldn't say authoritatively that everything being used in the show is wool. I know that everything I knitted with in episode 1 was 100% pure merino. I've said already, where we warned about the challenges, not the group challenge, but yes, our personal ones, we were allowed to design our patterns in advance. And I'm a little bit surprised that people are surprised at that, because that's how all these programs work, the Sewing Bee and Bake Off and that sort of thing. Someone asked which parts of the sofa did I contribute to, because they only really saw me doing the sand, but there was one shot I was knitting with a kind of, I think it was navy or dark purple. I did the sand, which, as I say, was about 5 foot by 4 foot, which covered the seat in the front, and the 2 inner panels of the arms, which required a bit of shaping because the arms curved. So I had to get that curve in. So I did the seat, the sand, what was meant to be the sand, and then this, I think it was a very dark sort of peacock blue for the sea, the inner arms, both sides with the curved fronts. Someone said, you know, there are these sort of rundown podcasts where people analyse the programme, and someone actually said that they thought I had used a finer gauge of wool for the X&O band, the OXO band on my jumper. I didn't. It was the Rowan big wool, the same as everyone used. I think I am quite a tight knitter, and especially Fair Isle does pull in. There's no doubt. You know, if you start a rib and then move on to Fair Isle, you have to increase a little bit because because of the floats and everything. Fair Isle will pull in, but I've been doing it so long, my tension's probably quite even, and I've managed to sort of sort out my two-handed tension for the colour dominance. So, you know, it probably does look relatively neat. So no, mine wasn't done on any finer wool. It was the same wool as everyone else and the same wool as the rest of the jumper. What else have people asked? Would you like to knit for a living? No. I've had my day at that during lockdown. I sort of, as I say, kept us going with knitting hats, and it's all knitting against the clock. People need something for a certain date, and you get a bit overwhelmed. And as the lady who made our wedding cake when we got married said, she made such a splendid job of it, and I said, would you not like to start a business? And she said, when you're doing it for money, it takes all the fun out of it, and that's perfectly true with anything. Although I ran out of time, someone was asking how fast do I knit. I've actually timed myself. It's like taking a typing test. I have timed myself, and I average about 60 stitches a minute. Now, a stitch a second doesn't sound all that fast, but that's also including the time for moving stitches up and stopping every number of stitches and pulling them down and resetting and getting on the go again. So I average about 60 stitches a minute. Someone wanted to know, am I connected in any way with Shetland? Not remotely. No family connection to Shetland at all. I just love the knitting. It all started with the music, being a musician as I am. So many wonderful musicians from Shetland. I have great friends there, and Brian Gear, who's probably one of the greatest living Shetland fiddlers. Queen of Lerwick, Violet Tulloch, who many people know. Gemma Donald, and another friend, Andy Kane, who's not a Shetlander, but who lives there now. Huge music tradition. So I had a connection in that way, and the knitting came a little bit later. The big question everyone's asking, who do I think will win? Well, I can't say. I had my own thoughts. One of the things they did ask us in the exit, you know, when when you exit is who did you think would win? And I told them who I thought, and they didn't broadcast that. So I'm not going to say it now because, well, it just wouldn't be right, would it? Because then I would have to give you an inkling of, if I told you who the person was, you would maybe decipher in my face whether I had been right or wrong. So I'm not going to say who I think will win the final of Game of Wool, but do keep watching, because we got the challenges in advance. I had prepared my challenge for this week, which is the doggy costume. Mine was going to be, I called it Sherlock Bones, but mine was going to be Sherlock Holmes. It was a little sort of tweed with a check knitted in, colour work again, check knitted into it, little coat with a little extra cape at the front, and it had to have a hat, little deer stalker. So I didn't get that far. I knew what that was going to be, and I had done my design. I hadn't test knitted it, but I had done it on paper, and I was just starting my third week design, which I won't tell you what that is because I'm not sure that's been released yet. What else? I've got questions here. Was I disappointed? No. Yes, of course I was disappointed, but I wasn't surprised. I mean, over the last number of months since it was filmed, I've built it up in my mind that it was terribly unfinished. Actually, when I saw it on television, I was a little bit nearer finished than I thought I was. I had about probably another 6 or 8 rows to knit before I joined the shoulders. I had just to rush ahead and do that, so that Dom could put it on, or we thought it was a mannequin originally. So that the armholes were too small, that there was another bit of length needing to go in that, and then my edgings and finish the pocket. I reckon another hour and a quarter probably would have done it. We did have the opportunity to block in a way. There was a steam table, which I didn't even see because I never got anywhere near that stage. But some of the people did have the chance to at least pin them out and give them a steam. No chance to wash, of course, but pin out and give them a steam. I wasn't surprised I left. I mean, my jumper, there were others who weren't finished. I had forgotten that, but mine was the most, and mine was the furthest from finished. And then, although I feel I contributed quite a large amount of knitting to the sofa, our sofa wasn't. So I was on a loser both ways. My tank top wasn't finished, and the sofa didn't get finished. So I wasn't at all surprised. And actually, the judges, Di and Sheila, they've been edited down so much that they're only really including the things, the parts of their assessments that inform their decision as to who's the big knitter and who goes home. And it's a shame because they are the loveliest, most charming 2 ladies you could ever meet. They are just gorgeous, both of them. And we had such a lot of fun with them. There were a lot of laughs during the judging, and incredibly positive about everything. I mean, even our sofa that was sitting, hanging in rags, they managed to find the loveliest things to say about it. But, there's only time to edit down the things that are important for the decision they arrived at. But really, they were the least intimidating 2 ladies that you could ever meet. And it's a shame in a way that just because they've had to strip it back to the bare nuts and bolts for broadcast, that we didn't get to see how much fun we had with them. They really are delightful. One last little thing, apart from the hat, this is my latest knit for myself. I've gone the opposite this time. It's not quite finished. This is a design by Erica Knight, wonderful knitwear designer, who was one of the knitting consultants on the programme. Another absolutely charming, glorious, magnificent person. I haven't quite finished this yet because it has this sort of mock patchwork, you add these big stitches to make it look, here and there, to make it look as though it's just tacked together. And I ran out of one of my colours, which has now arrived. So I've got another couple of joints here, but isn't that a lovely design? It's so eccentric. By eccentric, I don't mean weird, I mean off-centre. Nothing's in the middle, nothing's symmetrical. Even the back is only in 2 panels and the join is well off. I just think it's great. And now that's knitted in a wool you can't get anymore. I had to resort to eBay to get one more ball of one of the colours. It's Rowan again, and it's called Pebble Island. And it was designed and commissioned by Erica. And it's from sheep from Pebble Island, which is, I think, part of the Argentinian archipelago. It's lovely. It's lovely yarn. It's really soft, even though it is pure yarn. It's gorgeous. But I made a little error of judgment. I was so frightened it'd be too small. I've made it a little big. And it's got these sort of droop shoulder sleeves that involved short rows to get them, and an external 3-needle bind off. It really, I love it. But the reason I'm showing you this and telling you about it is colours are slightly muted, but yet still pingy. I do love it. Sorry, the cold. The reason I'm telling you about this is I did my Shetland thing with it, or tried to, and I don't know what possessed me. I thought, I'm not going to knit that back and front, and I'm not going to knit the sleeves flat. I'll do it my way. I'll steek the armholes. I'll knit the body and the sleeves. I mean, look at that little panel of ribbed colour that just appears out of nowhere there. I do like it very much. But it's intarsia, it's not colour work. Now, if you don't know what intarsia is, I know everyone does, but that's where you knit in 2 colours and you have a separate ball of wool for each colour. It's what Isaac was really doing with that sunset back to our sofa. And you'll see the join there. And when you get to the end of one colour, before you start the next, you twist the wools round each other and it locks them together. If you didn't do that, you'd end up with 2 separate panels with a big, nothing holding them together. It's an intarsia, and it didn't occur to me till I was down it a little, and the first time I had to insert the intarsia, that you can't do intarsia in the round, not easily, because when you finish on that round, your ball of wool, your wool is there, and when you go round, you arrive at that colour again at that end, and your wool's at that end. So the only way to do it, which nobody would bother doing, would be break it off and rejoin it, and it was a very bad idea, and I had to go back to the beginning. I don't know why. I mean, I know that you can't do intarsia in the round. I just was being smart, I think, really. But this has been my latest big, everything I'm showing you apart from the hat really has been knitted for me, because it's all I've got left. Everything else, once it's done, goes. But that's my latest knit for myself. It's I don't actually know if the design has a name, but I've got the pattern here actually. I just saw it. That's it there. It's called Salt Washed, and Pebble Island by Rowan, and I'm not sure the sweater has. Yes, it has. Of course, it has. Archipelago. Of course, the Argentinian archipelago is where Pebble Island, where the wool was brought from. But I think that's a good name for it, because it is like a group of islands, all these isolated patches of colour, and as I say, very asymmetrical. Even though that dark brown features heavily in the sleeves aren't the same. They both finish with that goldy colour, but I do love it. I'll try wearing it and see what other people think, when I go out. If they think it's too big, I might deconstruct it again and do a bit of impromptu steeking, which means I'll be able, perhaps, this would be a last option, that I'd be able to seam it to a smaller size and then cut away the excess bulk that would be inside that. I actually think it is designed to be to be quite large. So we'll see. Anyway, I'll come back another time, talk about colour dominance, and I can show you how I actually knit colour work Fair Isle with the 3 needles with two colours, and some of the things I do. I also haven't explained very well, or haven't explained how you make a steek. I've shown you why they're there and how you cut them, but there is a little bit involved with making a steek, which involves putting a few stitches onto a holder before you create the steek, so that when you pick up the stitches to go round, it does come round underneath. And the same with the neck, you put a few onto, depending the shape. V-neck's different, that comes much further down. I'll maybe talk a little about that. This has ended up being a terribly long video, I do apologise. But I thought you might be interested to hear some of the stuff. If you weren't, I'm sure you fast forwarded. Anyway, 2 nights from now, episode 2. And that, because I was gone by then, you know. As soon as you're gone, you're off the premises. You know, you don't go back. So I have no idea what went on. I have no idea who won, lost. I have a rough idea the order people went out in, I think. But I wouldn't, no, I wouldn't commit myself, because I probably got it wrong. Anyway, I'm now dying to watch on Sunday night to see what happens, because I don't know. So thanks for popping in, and make another video another time. Bye for now.